There's a stretch of highway out in Kentucky, near the Daniel Boone National Forest. Locals call it Devil's Curve. It's the kind of road that twists and turns so much you can't see what's coming. And on foggy nights, that's when she shows up. They say she's a young woman, dressed in a pale blue dress, standing on the side of the road. She looks lost, scared, and freezing. Most people drive right past her, but some, they stop. And when they do, she asks for a ride home. Travis was one of those people. He'd just finished a late shift at the factory and was driving home, tired but alert enough to notice her standing there in the fog. She was barefoot, her dress soaked at the hem, and her arms were wrapped around herself like she was freezing. He'd heard the stories about Devil's Curve, but in that moment, she just looked like someone who needed help. He pulled over, rolled down the window, and asked if she was okay. She didn't answer at first, just nodded and pointed up the road. "Can you take me home?" she asked, her voice so soft he almost didn't hear her. She gave him an address a few miles away, and he let her in. The ride was quiet, too quiet. She didn't say much, just stared out the window, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Travis tried to make small talk, asking if she was from the area, but she didn't answer. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional creak of the old truck. Something about her didn't sit right. Her dress looked old, like something out of the 1950s, and her skin was so pale it almost glowed in the dim light of the dashboard. But it was her eyes that really unsettled him. They weren't looking at the passing trees or the road ahead. They were fixed on something in the distance, something he couldn't see. When they reached the address, it was a small, run-down house at the end of a gravel driveway. The porch light was off, and the windows were dark. Travis turned to tell her they'd arrived, but the passenger seat was empty. She was gone. The door hadn't opened, and there was no sign of her anywhere. Confused and a little shaken, he got out of the truck and walked up to the house. He knocked on the door, and after a few moments, an older woman answered. She looked like she'd just woken up, her hair in curlers and a robe pulled tight around her. "Sorry to bother you," Travis said, "but I just gave a young woman a ride here. She said this was her address." The woman's face went pale. "What did she look like?" she asked. Travis described her. The pale blue dress, the bare feet, the way she stared out the window. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "That's my daughter," she said. "She died on this road 10 years ago." Travis felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded and walked back to his truck. As he drove away, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was still with him, watching from the back seat. They say she still shows up on foggy nights, waiting for someone to take her home. But no matter how many rides she gets, she never makes it there. It was late one night in Abilene, Texas, when Karen heard a knock on her door. She lived alone, out on the edge of town, and wasn't expecting visitors. When she looked through the peephole, she saw two kids, a boy and a girl, maybe 10 years old, standing on her porch. They were pale, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, and staring at the ground. Karen opened the door just a crack and asked if they were lost. The boy looked up first, and that's when she saw them. His eyes. Black as coal. No whites, no pupils. Just black. The girl looked up next, and her eyes were the same. They didn't smile, didn't fidget, just stood there and said, "Can we come in? We need to use the phone." Karen slammed the door and locked it. Her heart was racing and she could barely breathe. But the knocking didn't stop. It got louder, harder. And then they started whispering, "Let us in. We won't hurt you. We promise." She backed away from the door, her hands trembling as she reached for her phone. But when she tried to call the police, the line was dead. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Let us in. We're cold. We're lost. Please." Karen ran to the window and peeked out from behind the curtains. The kids were still there, standing perfectly still. But now there were more of them. 4, 5, 6. All with the same black eyes, all staring at her door. She didn't sleep that night. She sat in the corner of her living room, clutching a baseball bat, waiting for the sun to rise. When it finally did, the kids were gone. No footprints. No sign they'd ever been there. Karen thought it was over, but the next night the knocking started again. This time it was at her bedroom window. She didn't dare look. She just pulled the covers over her head and prayed for morning. They say black-eyed kids don't ask twice. If they show up at your door, don't open it. Because once they're inside, you'll never get them out.